African Americans. Those who had it hardest during the Roaring Twenties would find the Depression to be a mixed bag. Significant political gains were made, but poverty for many African Americans only got much, much worse. Eleanor Roosevelt, an early and strong supporter of civil rights and equalities for blacks in the White House, labored hard to get her husband to make progressive changes for blacks. Roosevelt himself was resistant to doing anything for African Americans, as he didn't want to alienate the vote of Southern Democrats, among whom he enjoyed unanimous support in the 1932 and 36 elections. Largely through the pressure of his wife, FDR appointed more than 100 African Americans to positions in the federal government, including Mary McLeod Bethune, who would head the newly formed Division of Negro Affairs designed to keep the president apprised of conditions and needs of the African American community. Bethune also helped organize the Black Cabinet to aid and advise the president. Never before in American history had blacks had such a strong voice in their own government. In 1939, Eleanor Roosevelt invited Marian Anderson to perform a concert to an integrated black and white audience at Constitutional Hall on Easter Sunday. The Daughters of the American Revolution, however, who traditionally planned and presented events and festivities at the Constitution Hall, denied Roosevelt's request to have Anderson sing simply because she was black. Incensed, Eleanor Roosevelt resigned her membership to the Daughters of the American Revolution, along with thousands of its other members. Roosevelt arranged to have Marian Anderson perform her concert, which she opened with My Country 'Tis of Thee, from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to a live integrated crowd of over 75,000 people and millions more on the radio. Clearly, there was a different tone in the government, if not in the country, regarding race relations at this time. For most blacks, however, these political gains made little to no difference. Poor blacks in the South, still sharecropping in the tradition of their enslaved ancestors, only saw less out of an already deprived economic existence. Hard times created more racial tension in the South. Lynchings, which had declined somewhat during the 1920s, rose again as the NAACP documented them. Poor sharecropping farmers faced starvation and malnutrition, as poor black children suffered from diseases such as scurvy due to a lack of vitamin C, and the rickets, a nutritional deficiency which caused the joints to bend and swell. Blues musician Robert Johnson, who lived in the deepest, most segregated part of southern Mississippi, expressed suffering and pain through his voice and guitar like nobody before him. He didn't invent the blues. That style of music had been around since the late 1800s, but he transformed it. An accomplished finger-picking and slide guitarist, he brought a level of talent and musical virtuosity never seen before. His voice could waver from painful, sorrowful wails in the upper register to low, mean, and intimidating angry growls. His songs documented the uncertainty of a population seemingly without a future. Rambling on My Mind, Stones in My Pathway, I'm a Steady Rolling Man, and Walking Blues all documented the restlessness and the lack of a sense of home that many African Americans felt. His songs also invoke the supernatural, usually the devil, as a force preventing characters in his songs from finding peace and happiness. Symbolically, his devils in songs such as Crossroad Blues, Preaching Blues, Up Jump the Devil, Hellhound on My Trail, and Me and the Devil Blues represented the real devils in his life and the world around him. Economic uncertainty and constant poverty. Johnson lived and died surrounded by mystery and obscurity. There is very little known about his early life or even the date of his birth. His death is also clouded in mystery, as some legends have him being poisoned by a woman he did wrong. Others say it was the woman's husband who poisoned Johnson, yet others say it was alcohol, either from drinking in excess or drinking a bad batch of moonshine that did him in. Even the exact location of his grave remains shrouded in controversy. This all contributed to the blues music to give it a sense of mystery, to give it a sense of otherworldliness. Regardless, Johnson did die on August 16, 1938. He died at a crossroads near Greenwood, Mississippi, the very location he sung about in his most famous and covered song, Crossroad Blues, in which the title character in the song sold his soul to the devil in exchange for talent and virtuosity on the guitar. Johnson's legacy survives to this day. Musicians from Jimi Hendrix to Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, Stevie Ray Vaughan to Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Jeff Beck, and the White Stripes' Jack White all claim Johnson not merely as an influence, but a prime motivation for why they play music. Eric Clapton in 2004 released the album Me and Mr. Johnson, which is an entire disc devoted to Robert Johnson's music. The blues grew, matured, and found its voice and instrument during the Depression, and the future of music would forever be determined. City life. The Depression's effects were also visible in cities, although to a lesser extent than for Midwest farmers and Southern blacks. Many cities still offered work. Just because production was down during the Depression didn't mean it was extinct. Many factories, especially in textiles and steel, even taxicabs remained open, but the demand for their materials was diminished. This meant that there was an overabundance of labor, and therefore a decrease in wages and the quality of working conditions. Not until the Labor Relations Board and the Wagner Act passed in the mid-1930s did workers experience an improvement in rights and treatment. In December of 1936, auto workers in Flint, Michigan were sick and tired of General Motors' continued attempts to root out and eliminate members of the Auto Workers Union. They called for a general strike, and workers literally sat down in Flint's General Motors auto plant. They refused to get up or leave until GM met their demands. Workers occupied, that is, they literally lived in the auto plant, shutting down production entirely for over 45 days. Police had repeatedly attempted to raid the plant in order to force out workers and arrest them, but they were too entrenched, pelting the invading officers with streams from fire hoses, throwing hinges or bolts or anything they could throw at them. With the aid of John L. Lewis, a man who had become a giant among union leaders for his work with the United Mine Workers in the 1920s, the United Auto Workers not only won the right to exist as a union, with formal recognition from GM, they also won a number of the rights they fought for. A huge victory for workers on the assembly lines, and a huge symbolic victory for unions all over the country, as the force of law through the Wagner Act began to take effect. Industrial resistance, as well as changes in international demand for American products, along with the adjustment to the new stipulations and requirements of the Wagner Act and the NLRB, caused unemployment to rise again in the late 30s. Lines at soup kitchens sometimes stretched for blocks as hungry urban residents awaited what might very well be their only meal for the day. Men who were once successful stockbrokers or bankers could be seen selling apples, pencils, or even begging on street corners. But cities offered one thing that rural communities didn't have in abundance: distractions from the hardships. Americans turned by the millions to movie theaters and their radios to temporarily escape the hardships in their lives. Most movie theaters charged no more than a dime for admittance to a film, and often even provided free popcorn with admission. Films in the 1930s tended to revolve around anything other than the U.S. during the Depression. Musicals featured catchy show tunes and attractive, well-dressed dancers. Fantasy pictures such as King Kong took viewers to strange lands, inhabited by strange beasts and even stranger people. The Wizard of Oz thinly veiled its depiction of the Depression. Young Dorothy lived in Kansas on a farm during the 30s, and was literally blown away by a mighty twister, or a dust storm if you want to look at it that way, to the magical land of Oz, where wizards, witches, flying monkeys, and emerald cities were brilliantly photographed in bright color when compared to the sepia-toned, somewhat drab and depressing black and white photography of the scene shot in Kansas. The most popular film in the late 1930s, the most popular film in the history of film in America, however, transported Americans back in time to the Civil War, in an epic which detailed the struggle of a young heroine named Scarlett O'Hara, who went from riches to rags as a result of General Sherman's march to the sea. Adjusted for inflation, Gone with the Wind to this day has made more than $1.4 billion in the U.S. alone. Compared to the $600 million Titanic has made, that makes Gone with the Wind far and away the single most popular movie in American history. James Cagney became a popular anti-hero on the big screen, playing gangsters in many films. America didn't seem to mind seeing banks victimized and the robbers of those banks celebrated as heroes.